So I'm exhausted. We just spent about 6 hours voting on 200-something bills in one of the last big days of the legislative session this year, but we did some really cool stuff. We've seen our homeless count reduced by about 10% over the last year, but we want to drive that number even lower. We put $50 million into tackling homelessness. We put $500 million into affordable housing. We've tackled healthcare and made sure that no matter what the federal government does, we're going to make sure that people who have pre-existing conditions here in Hawaii are still covered. Folks who need help the most are going to continue to get it. We've also tackled gun violence prevention and making sure that people who are felons, who are mentally ill, have to turn them over to make sure that guns stay out of the wrong hands. And we've done small stuff too, like making sure that abandoned vehicles in our communities are actually picked up by the counties and taken off the roads within just a few days rather than sitting around for months at a time. But the biggest winner this year is the environment. And we've taken steps that are not only great for Hawaii, but are going to be precedent-setting for the rest of the country. Schools are taking the lead. So what schools have done is move toward farm-to-school, sustainable, local produce and local meals. And that's something schools like Ka'ohao Elementary, formerly Lanikai Elementary, right here on Oahu, have really got involved with. Their kids are eating better, and all the food that they're not eating and all the waste that they're not throwing away, they're actually composting on site, and it's built into the curriculum of the schools so kids of all ages across all grades can take part and then take these lessons back to their parents. It's a win for taxpayers because it means we get better meals at our schools with less cost for trying to throw away all the trash. The bill that we just passed creates a whole new grant program which any school can apply for to get money to be able to do this kind of composting and farm-to-school stuff if their kids want to do it. And that's really exciting because we know, like Lanikai, there are a whole bunch of other schools out there that are ready to go. Few people actually realize that we've lost about half the reefs on the planet in the last 40 years. So we need to do everything we can to protect what's left. And that means tackling everything from runoff to invasive species, but also the chemicals we put in the water, like oxybenzone, which is known to have an impact on reef health. It shows up in our sunscreens, and one of the big steps we took is becoming the first state in the country this year to prohibit the sale of sunscreens that contain these kinds of toxic chemicals. It sets a precedent, and all the big pharmaceutical companies and retailers are going to have to adapt. A few years ago, we created the Hawaii Climate Initiative to tackle climate change and sea level rise in Hawaii, and we've got our first reports back. We know that we're expecting to lose about $19 billion in coastal infrastructure, homes, roads, here in Oahu and the neighbor islands over the next few decades. And that means that we have to start being proactive. And so one of the big wins that we just passed was a bill requiring all environmental impact statements going forward to consider sea level rise so that we're not building roads and schools and other sorts of things right in the path of storm surges and sea level rise and erosion, because ultimately taxpayers will have to pay to move those in the end anyway. So let's do it right the first time, and that's exactly what this bill requires. One of the big issues we've been dealing with for the last 6 or 7 years has been the unintended impacts of pesticides on our communities. We've been trying to get a handle on this and come up with some ways to create disclosures to determine whether or not those pesticides that are being sprayed match up with any sort of the health impacts that are being experienced. The bill we passed is groundbreaking because not only does it require disclosure for all the big restricted use pesticide sprayers, but it also creates buffer zones around schools and sensitive areas where our kids learn and play. The third thing it does is make Hawaii the first state to ban the chemical chlorpyrifos, which has been responsible for thousands of deaths worldwide every single year. It sent dozens of agriculture workers to the hospital right here in Hawaii, and it's already been banned by the European Union and is on the list of most toxic chemicals that need to be dealt with. And we're the first state to really get a handle on that and require it to be replaced with safer pesticides going forward. One of the biggest wins this session is taking the next steps on our long-term climate goals. A couple of years ago, we made Hawaii the first state to commit to 100% renewable electricity, and our utilities are exceeding everyone's expectations. They're committing to reaching 100% renewable electricity not by 2045, as the law requires, but by 2040, and they're going to do so at a cost savings of over $5 billion cheaper than sticking with status quo fossil fuels. And in the transportation sector, we're starting to convert buses to electric buses. We're starting to see the rollout of EVs and the widespread adoption because ultimately they're cheaper to get around in and cheaper to maintain than traditional gas cars. And within a few years, EVs are expected to be cheaper to produce and buy than a typical gas car. The last piece of the puzzle is tying all these sectors together. Electricity with transportation and with ultimately greenhouse gas sequestration to fill any voids and make sure that we can eliminate our carbon emissions. So the bill this year, it makes Hawaii the first state to commit by law to eliminating its greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible, but no later than 2045, and building a zero emissions clean economy that can be replicated anywhere else in the country. Thanks to the support of the organizations out in our communities, and especially thanks to you who've really written in with testimony and called our offices and made your voices heard. You've made these changes possible. These big wins this year demonstrate that people can make a difference if they get involved. We've got a lot more to do, but I know we can achieve these things in the years to come, as long as people stick around, pay attention, and stay involved.